Wow. Thank you to all of our CEO award winners for their discussion on how to build diverse pipeline and workforces, how to truly create strong ERG programs, and to ensure gender equity and diversity is not only in the boardroom, but in supply chains. Now we move to the specific issue of diversity, equity, inclusion, and building a truly inclusive workforce where everyone feels that they can belong, be authentic, and be powerful. I would like to introduce Ben Hasan, Senior Vice President, Chief Culture, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer at Walmart. Ben, take it away.
Thank you, Gwen. I can't tell you how excited I am to host such an illustrious panel. It's actually a little intimidating, but I think I'll be able to get through it. So the title of this panel is Diversity Across the Pipeline, Women of Color Leading the Change. So we're going to start by asking each of the panelists individually to tell us, first of all, what your role and responsibility is at your current company, and a little about your personal and professional journey to the role that you sit in today. So, Michelle, let's start with you.
Thank you, Ben. So I am, pardon me, Michelle Gadsden-Williams, Global Head of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Blackrock. Now, I'm what you call a lifer in this work of DE&I. I've been a practitioner for 30 years. I started my career in marketing and product development, and after about 5 years of doing that work, and doing some soul searching about what I wanted to do in my career, and understanding what kind of impact I wanted to have in those organizations where I was employed, I soon thereafter transitioned to strategic planning and organizational development. And growing up, my father used to say, "You are not here on this earth to occupy space. You're here to make a difference, and it's up to you to determine what that difference is." Well, I found that difference, and I felt that in the work of DE&I, I can make a meaningful, substantive difference in the organizations where I am employed. I've led DEI for a number of multinational companies and industries, including consumer goods, big pharma, financial services, and professional services, specifically at companies like Merck, Novartis, Credit Suisse, and Accenture, both inside and outside of the United States. I've lived in Switzerland for 10 years, Istanbul, Turkey for 5 years, and Hong Kong for 3 years, all leading diversity practice. I chose to join Blackrock in September of last year for a number of reasons, primarily because I was convinced during my interview process last summer, and even more so now, that this is an organization that really wants to accelerate progress and to really lead in this area. And there are three things that I typically look for in my conversations with CEOs and other leaders when it comes to this work. It's the courage to act, the commitment to lead, and the conviction to change. And if any of these things are missing from that conversation, I tend to look the other way. As you can imagine, I've seen the good, the bad, and the indifferent as it pertains to this work. And what I've learned over the years is that indifference serves no one. And as a chief diversity officer, we are change agents and constructive disruptors. And our goal is to leave an organization in better condition than when we entered. We help organizations transform their cultures to ensure that every single person in it can realize their ambition or their North Star. So as you've heard from our chairman and CEO, Larry Fink, we are truly invested in leading in this area, and I want to be part of that evolution.
Michelle, thank you so much for your lifelong commitment to the work and to society in general. So next up, Carla.
Thank you, Ben. It's a pleasure to be here with you and the panelists, and I want to thank the WBC for having me today. So my journey into HR hasn't been one in which it was a direct passion initially for me. My background really did start in consulting, and I actually ended up having an opportunity to move into HR consulting. And I think that is where I got the bug in the passion around HR. But primarily in my career has been at IBM. I am what most will call a lifer at IBM. I'm in my 22nd year, and I've had the opportunity to have numerous roles as an HR generalist, in talent, doing strategy work, executive development, executive planning, transformation work. And I also had the pleasure of living in Asia for about 3 years. which was an amazing opportunity to not only live abroad, but to also do some great work working with and helping our teams grow and transform in those markets. I had the honor to be able to compete for this role last year and selected as the CDIO of IBM. This is actually my dream job. This is the role that I really aspired to have at one point in my career. And I'm really excited. I think that the work that I've been able to do around DE&I through the various roles I've had in HR has really positioned me for this role. I am excited about the work we're doing and the journey ahead of us. But I am really, really focused with our leaders at IBM and our IBMers around how do we really have meaningful change, systemic change that's going to be impactful to address the issues that we all face as CDIOs. So thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks, Carla. And to those listening in, we're halfway through. You can already see how fantastic this panel is going to be. Next up, Shari.
Thanks, Ben. It's so wonderful to be here with everyone. Why don't I start by introducing myself this way? I'm first generation on my father's side, born in this country. My family hails from the US, Jamaica, and the Cayman Islands. I'm fourth generation African-American women with an advanced degree. My daughter will be the fifth. I am married to the love of my life. I have 2 college-age children. I have a learning difference, which means that sometimes school was hard. I have lived, worked, and studied outside the United States. I have worked for 5 different companies across 6 different disciplines. And what I can tell you is that even with all of that, I get to sit in this chair, in this seat, at one of the most important and influential technology companies in the world. You see, what I just shared with you are my dimensions of the diversity, the things that make me uniquely me, my human dimension, what I was born with, my cultural dimension, the things that I picked up along the way in life, and my work dimension. And I can honestly tell you that I sit in this seat because the journey that I had was not a straight path. It was one that had twists and turns. I have to tell you, I spent the early part of my life feeling like I was writing with my left hand and I was really right-handed. I went to school to be a lawyer. I studied business and law. And when I got out, I took a sales job. And I have to tell you, I never looked back. I finally found like I was in that place and space that authentically would allow me to be me. But along the way, where you spend your time matters. I spent so much of my time working at Kodak and Xerox, spending time with people, EROs in particular, raising my hand to help along the way. And I have to tell you, it's then that I found a path into DE&I. Will forever be grateful to the amazing Candy Castleberry Singleton, who is now over at Amazon, who said, hey, you know how to execute like nobody's business. Come here and do it with me. That said, that path took me to where I am today, finding my purpose in a role that you probably won't find in the same way in any other company. You see, 10 years ago, I had the amazing opportunity to meet a then sales leader who said to me in an interview, what you do in your day job has incredible value in what I do in mine. You see, what he knew to be true was that he was a technology leader who was about to embark on this multi-billion-dollar market called collaboration, and it was going to forever change this opportunity for diversity to get in the room at the table and for people to participate, which would ultimately deliver better outcomes, because that's the promise that we said diversity would always yield. Here's what happened. I now sit in a seat. I am the Chief Inclusion and Collaboration Officer and Vice President of Inclusive Future and Strategy here at Cisco. I am forever grateful to the amazing Chuck Robbins, who is our CEO, who took a big bet on that vision that There was value to create at the intersection of inclusion, diversity, collaboration, and technology. My team sets the people strategy for the company. We're responsible for all things that you know and love about DE&I, and we are also ushering in what it means to leverage the power of inspiration as currency as we build towards our purpose to power an inclusive future for all. It is an absolute honor to be here and on this panel with these amazing women. And Ben, I'm going to hand it back over to you.
See, I told y'all I was a little intimidated, and we still haven't finished yet. So now, next up, Shari, thank you so much, and it's so good to see you again. Next up, the amazing Calandra.
Hello, thank you all for having me. I'm Kalandra Gerald. I am a diversity and inclusion executive at Bank of America. I am sitting in for the amazing Cynthia Bowman, who could not be here today, who is our Chief Diversity, Inclusion, and Talent Acquisition Officer. And my journey is a little different. I am first generation college, first generation corporate America. I grew up with blue collar workers. Let my grandmother tell it, I am the senior vice president of Bank of America. I'm the only one. Please don't ruin it for her. But I like to think my journey is one of authenticity, my unique rural upbringing, and where preparation and opportunity just collided. I've been with Bank of America 24 years. And over that journey, I started as an administrative assistant. I took my passion for what I didn't see when I grew up and got involved in our first employee network, the African American Networking Initiative, which is now the Black Professional Group. And I started being visible and really contributing. And I moved into human resources as a learning consultant. And then I did instructional design and talent management. And then I met the amazing Cynthia Bowman and our former Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, Jerry Thomas. And they invested in me and said, you know what, everything you've been doing up until this point, this is your moment. Come over and lead women and people of color strategy for us. And this was when the GDI organization was really storming and forming. And I love this job and I love my journey because I have the humility and the really rolling up your sleeves enough to really know what it's like to have to grow your career and get pulled through the pipeline. But I also understand that I want to be the woman that I needed when I first started my career or that I didn't see when I grew up. So it's just a pleasure to be amongst this esteemed panel. Thank you for having me. And I can't wait to get into this conversation.
Yeah, Calandra, thanks so much for sharing that. And isn't it interesting how sometimes our parents think we run the whole company? Yeah, my son, he runs Walmart.
Don't tell anybody.
Like, I'm like, Dad, I don't run Walmart. Come on, man, come on. Michelle, we're going to go to you. Now, you spent the majority of your career in diversity and inclusion space. So from your perspective, how have you seen the work of the Chief Diversity Officer over the past 20 years change? And then have you seen anything different in the last 18 months?
Well, thank you for the question, Ben. So the role of the CDO has really evolved over the years. And it's interesting, as I was preparing for the panel, I was reading an article in the Financial Times, I believe it was yesterday, it was published, that the role of the CDO is the fastest growing C-suite role since 2020. Now that's a shift in terms of this work. And I'm talking about diversity of yesteryear. When we were talking about diversity in the context of affirmative action, then it was diversity, then it was DI, DEI. And so whatever vernacular you want to call it, it's all the same to me. And another interesting fact that I came across is that the appointments of CDOs grew 84% as a proportion of the total number of senior executives hired this year alone. And so the question becomes, for those of us who have made this our life's work, and our purpose long before the worldwide call to action for racial and social justice, in the wake of the fatal attacks on George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and so many others, in my view, this is not just a moment, but this is a real movement, which is driving the evolution of the role. The work itself has changed. The conversation has changed. The vernacular has changed, and thus our strategies have changed. With the convergence of societal injustices and a global pandemic, the discourse and the engagement of racial and social justice, inclusivity, and well-being in the workplace has increased exponentially, more so than I've ever seen in the past. And so these incidents have really raised a level of consciousness around DEI. And as a result, the stakes have gone up in a lot of organizations, and ours is certainly included in that. The commitment to DEI has become even more critical. There's a war for talent in the marketplace that continues to present a challenge for all organizations. And the changing work models due to the pandemic has really shifted and impacted our talent over the past year. So that said, most companies have decided to take a more holistic and strategic approach to the effort. And this is going to require a different kind of CDO, more so than diversity practice of yesteryear. So like most organizations, we've evolved in this space and we've integrated equity into our strategy, which really, again, symbolizes the maturity of diversity in practice. This is a new terminology that we've infused into our work. And in my view, it's the most important factor in the equation, where we're all now re-examining all of our policies and practices and programming to ensure that there's fair access to advancement, fair opportunities, fair outcomes for all employees. But the role is just not relegated to talent and culture. It's about our customers, it's about our clients, and the impact that we're going to have on society at large. So our strategies are now more reflective of that. So it's a lot more comprehensive, it's a lot more holistic, but the CDO now has a seat at the table in the C-suite. And I think that the role has definitely changed in the 30 years that I've been involved.
Just brilliant. For those out there listening, I hope you're taking notes. I wish I could, but I can't as the moderator. So Michelle, thank you so much for that. Just brilliant. So Carla, I'm going to come to you next, and Calandra, you get ready to follow up on this question as well. So this is one of those myths that just drives me crazy all the time. Quote, there are not enough women of color in the talent pipeline. Could you share your own perspective around this, and maybe what does the data actually really show?
Yeah, so look, we're gonna debunk this myth today because I find it to be a big distraction and a detractor for really addressing that we do have talent in the pipeline. So let's really look at kind of the demographics. So the World Economic Forum, they actually benchmark the number of women just in general at about 40% in the workplace, job-ready availability of talent. And when we look at the majority of the US population being women at about 51%, and when we really dig into women of color in the census data, just recently in the US, 38% of the US population are people of color, of which 40% are women grads. And of those women grads, 30% are women of color. So you have this thriving availability of talent, which represents about 25% of the workforce. And you have this thriving growth of skills where women of color are growing, these populations are growing. And so the availability is there. I think what we get really focused on is the why not, opposed to seeking and looking where the talent does exist. So I would like to really focus in on what these barriers look like and really these biases that we often are in a position of really being able to remove so that we can have these entries of opportunity, but also to really change your strategy, your diversity strategy around the talent for which you want to hire. So it's important to really access that talent. So broadening your pipeline of competition, the workforce is there, the skills are there, the education levels are there. I think that it is where you're going and where your strategy is actually focused is what's needed. So I do have a few ideas, Ben, on how to address this, because McKinsey had a really great study last year that they did on Black women. And as a result of that study, they talked about where the talent exists. And they talked about the Black community as well overall. And in that strategy, they talked about location strategy. Well, did you know that 60% of the Black community are in the South? Did you know that Native American populations are in the American Southwest? Did you know that Asian women are either, people of color are either in the West Coast or the East Coast? Did you know that our Latin population we're going to predominantly have in the American Southwest or the South? So, and it's really digging deep into the specific location strategy. Are your businesses set up for success, where they're actually going where their talent exists? And are you building an ecosystem around where people of color live, work, and educate their families and their children so you can drive increased representation of your talent? So that's a big part of the strategy. Partnering with organizations that have access to support your talent outlook is really, really key. And ensuring, lastly, that your diversity strategy around hiring and retaining your talent really, really focus in on diversity, diverse panels, diversity of the people who are actually hiring your talent, interview practices that are set up around skills, anti-bias training to ensure that you're hiring with your recruiting teams as well as your hiring managers, that they have the tools that may be preventing them from taking a chance on this talent that is out there and qualified. So set goals and you will see progress if you're intentional.
Spot on, spot on. We saw that McKinsey study. The other thing that was interesting in that study was that the jobs that were growing and the places where they were growing were not the places where people of color were actually living.
That's
really,
right.
really interesting work.
That's
so Calandra,
right.
more on this point. Thank you so much, Carla. That was amazing.
Yeah, Carla, that was spot on. And just to kind of amplify your point, we do not have a pipeline problem. I think we have process problems. And if I think about that, what's your recruiting strategy? So to your point, are you recruiting at HBCUs? What's your HBCU strategy? They mostly sit in the South. So how do we attack this very early? One of the things we've learned is that you've got to capture talent with a lens on diversity very early in their career, because a lot of us just don't have the pedigree and the background of the majority. So what's your recruiting strategy? Where are you actually going after? What do your job specs look like? Are they attractive, right, to women and women of color, or are they just generic where, you've got more of the same applying? You made a great point. Do you make sure that you are enforcing diverse interviewers? So who are you looking at on the other side of the table? You want to see yourself. Again, you can't be what you can't see. And then if you are in the organization, how we're pulling people up that are already in the company, again, giving them the equitable opportunities and the visibility that we don't often get. So sponsorship, advocacy, making sure that they're not all in the same types of organization like staff support. And then lastly, creating a culture where you have that sense of belonging and you feel like you can really succeed, because you can have all the women of color in the world, but if you don't have a culture where you feel like you belong and you're valued, you get zero value from that diversity. So I completely agree with you.
Awesome. Thank you. So, Shari, I've been on a couple panels with you before, and I know you are dying to get in right now. So I'm going to jump to you. So when we were preparing for this conversation a few weeks back, this idea of pet versus power came up. I'd never heard the concept before. I found it very interesting. I started asking other people if they heard it, and there's very few people who have heard it. So can you explain for the audience what's the meaning and how has it personally impacted you, Shari, in the workplace?
Absolutely. Thank you for picking up on that from our prep calls, because it is absolutely a phenomenon that was the biggest revelation in my personal career and had the potential to be the biggest derailer of the opportunity for me to reach my extraordinary. And if that is true for me, it's probably true for many, many others. This concept of pet to threat is a concept that comes out of a body of research out of the University of Georgia. Dr. Keisha Thomas did this body of research, and what it says that for many women of color, in particular Black women and Latinx women, there is this motion that happens with our career, our progress and our success comes on the heels of the way in which we help in the organization and ultimately climb that ladder and then ultimately take on those leadership roles. But something happens between the climb and landing in those roles of power that does move you from this place where you are adored, you're a pet, you're not a threat, and then you are. And maybe I can just give an example of my own career. Personally, I'm a pleaser. I have grown up that way in my personal upbringing from my family. From a workplace standpoint, I was one of those people, always raised my hand, always willing to help, always delivered big. And what happens when you do that is that you then get tapped to help people over and over and over again. Their careers continue to grow. So you are helping them help grow. And at some point, it does benefit you as well until it doesn't. And here's when it starts to transition. It starts to transition when you are then leapfrogging into those seats where you have power and budget, a P&L, headcount, and decision-making rights. And in that moment, when you are showing up the same way you did before you sat in that seat, but with breadth and depth and prominence, where you have influence and visibility, people start to feel some sort of way. They start to perceive you in a different light. They start to use words to describe you when you're showing up the same way that are completely different than before. Listen, I have to tell you, I got to a place where I am beyond tired of being misunderstood and having others use words that don't reflect who I am, what I deliver, and the value that I bring. Instead, I have to tell you on this journey, what it has taught me is, one, we got to talk about the pet versus threat phenomenon. We have to talk about how it is impacting and stalling and or derailing the careers of incredible women of color. And then we got to start helping people understand how to take agency to overcome it. I have to tell you, if you are sitting in that seat right now, wherever you are, and you are seeing some of this translate into what you are experiencing in your career, my advice to you would be threefold. Agency matters, and you have it. You just got to exercise it. What that means is, for me, my three things that I did was, number one, I had to start telling my own story, right? Because the way in which people told my story before, oh my gosh, she's the helper, versus, oh my gosh, she's really tough. Went from helper to tough, nothing changed except for my power. Look, you got to tell your own story. You've got to give people the words to use to describe how they are experiencing the same person you were before with this expanded remit, because you are in purpose. And then you also have to find a space and place where you can enroll them, because the longer they sit on the outside feeling some sort of way, the more they're going to feel some sort of way. So how do you enroll them in the success of what's possible given the work that you are driving? And then the last thing is get your own data. I have to tell you, there were so many meetings that I had with people where they would share with me data points like, don't be so perfect, or, you know, your bar is too high. Listen, get your own data. You know how you're climbing. Create the space for you, the narrative that you want people to have, enroll them in the work that you are doing, and make sure that the intentions of those around you are in support of the purpose that you are on this earth to deliver. But the pet versus threat phenomenon, it is real, and it can leave you in this space and place where you are misunderstood if you don't exercise your agency.
Awesome. Very clear. So thank you for that, Shari. I think many have now been educated on this notion of pet versus threat. So Michelle, this next question is you before we go around with a wrap up after this question. So I steal shamelessly from really smart people all the time. It's a group out of Greensboro, North Carolina, that says, in this work, diagnosis dictates treatment. You got to spend the time to diagnose what is the problem you're trying to solve before you actually try to solve it. I'm also a big fan of Brian Stevenson that says you can't solve a problem until you're willing to get proximate to the problem. And so this next question is one of those getting proximate to the problem questions. So Michelle, what can women do differently to support one another? And why is it important for white women to support and sponsor women of color?
Thanks for that question, Ben. So first I want to start off by saying that I personally believe that it is my indelible responsibility to support, coach, mentor, sponsor, advocate, champion another woman. And I know that there are many of us who share that same perspective. But unfortunately, research has shown that women of color, we still lag behind white women in organizational access, in upward mobility, and other key indicators of leadership success for a variety of reasons. So I would encourage white women to be a lot more conscious and intentional in terms of how they wield their power, utilizing their internal collateral, removing barriers, influencing and clearing pathways for all women, specifically for women of color. Now, change will only occur if and when there's an acknowledgement that we as women, that we're not a monolith. Women of color, we have a very different life experience and a different identity in our workplaces. And unfortunately, women of color, we have the double bind of gender and race to contend with. So change happens through an increased awareness, a cultural awareness, so that differences can be acknowledged. And so what I would encourage all of us to do is to become a lot more aware of our own identity, our own privilege, and how it affects the perception and the treatment of those of a different cultural background. To speak up and to speak out against false assumptions of others, to be intentional but authentic in building relationships with women of color. This will create and build trust among the sisterhood. And take the time to educate yourself on the historical context of women of color, its impact on their personal and professional lives. And the last thing I would say to this point is, proactively engage in cross-cultural sponsorship relationships. Women of color are typically over-mentored and under-sponsored. We need your advocacy and your support. And so when one of us succeeds, we all succeed. So there you have it.
Awesome. That was called mic drop. Thank you. So we've got a little over 10 minutes left. And so I wanted to spend time on this last question to get some final thoughts from each one of you. So we're going to round robin. Carla, you're going to go first. Calandra, you're going to go second. Shari, you're third. And Michelle, you'll close us out. So Carla?
All right. Loving what I'm hearing today, Ben. Pet versus threat. This is all goodness. So look, I have three things that I think are really, really important in this moment. And Michelle, I mean, you just really hit the nail on the head. You have to acknowledge that this is an issue and that it has to be changed. So I am really big on being bold and making commitments. So that is the first thing that I think is really, really critical. To be bold and make commitments means that you have to get the people in power in the room to decide that there is an issue, but also to act and to determine what you're going to do about it. You're going to set goals. You're going to have aspirations. They're going to be bold and big, and you're going to really, really track progress. And you're going to be really transparent. You're going to talk about it in your DE&I reports. You're going to talk about it in your town halls and your organizations. You're going to talk about it to your boards, your leadership team. So it has to be intentional. So that's what's really, really important here. You have to insist on making room. And what I mean by that is, if your leadership team isn't representative of a diverse group of leaders, you must insist that you make room on your team with your leaders at every level, in every role, in every part of your demographic of your business. You also have to insist that you do that with partnership in an inclusive way with your allies. So allyship is so important to our success. Just as Michelle stated, how white women are so important to women of color growing is because women actually are the ones who actually promote and develop other women at a higher rate than men. But we also cannot do this without men. We have to do that with them in an inclusive way, and they are big allies to make this change very meaningful. And then lastly, because I'm with a tech company, to accelerate change, data, AI, analytics, it informs your decisions with data and facts. It's science-based. No way you can cut it. You can remove all the myths. You can debunk everything that you hear on the why not. If you use it to inform and to help make the right decisions for your organizations to grow around inclusion and diversity and belonging, you will be successful. This is how you're going to show up practicing these inclusive behaviors in your organization. So I'll leave you guys with that, Ben.
Thank you, Carla. All right, Calandra, we're coming up on time, 2 minutes each.
Absolutely. I'll give you
up.
a minute back, actually. I'll be brief. And because I am in financial services, I'll say lead with the business, right? You know, the power of the purse. If you think about the spending power and the client base of women, and to Michelle's point, we're not some monolithic group. You know, we are well in position. We, diversity and women and focus on multicultural women and women of color is no longer a moral imperative. It is a business imperative. Mm-hmm. So leading with the data, making sure that you can stand flat-footed in front of our clients and our communities and say, here's what we're about. The second thing I really wanted to reiterate is the advocacy piece. We don't need saviors. We need allies, advocates, sponsors. Mm-hmm. We need people giving real-time feedback. What are people saying about you when you're not in the room so that you can work on those perceived gaps? I love Shari's point about pet to threat. I wish I had $1 for every time someone gave me feedback and they didn't give it directly to me. So how do we kind of start opening up that feedback loop where we can really start to build our careers and focus on things that really matter to pull us through? And then lastly, just support other women, period. We started something at Bank of America. I was proud to be a part of this Women Ready to Lead. And we brought women in at all levels. So senior leaders, but also entry-level women. And we literally shared our different experiences. And we're not some monolithic group, the unique challenges of a Latina versus a Black African-American woman versus an Asian. And if you can do that early, think about what that looks like when these women grow into senior leader roles. So again, I think it's support, advocacy, declaring it as a priority, and remembering that when we support each other and we lead with women, it's just good business.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Shari?
+1 to what they said and whatever Michelle's about to say. I'm going to leave you with 3 things. Transparency matters. As you are doing this work or any other work that is about creating opportunity and possibility for people, we have to be transparent about how we're doing both the wonderful things and where we need work. The second thing is look for value vacancies. Like this ties back to data. Instead of using the predictable data, I would recommend that we start looking at the unpredictable data and we intersect it and we look for those value vacancies that have the biggest opportunity for us to really understand the opportunity for creating value for people and communities in our companies. And then the third piece is don't go where the path may lead. Go instead where there is no path and leave a trail. I'm going to leave it at that because I'm at my 2 minutes, but thank you, Ben. Thank you.
You're awesome. You're awesome. Michelle, we leave it to you to close us out.
Oh, the pressure. I honestly believe that it is an empty argument when people claim that there's not enough women of color in the talent pipeline, full stop. In most organizations, talent is equally distributed, but the opportunity is not. And there are plenty of qualified women and men of color in the pipeline. And building a diverse talent pipeline is really not that difficult. And like anything else, it's going to require relentless focus, dedication, a little ingenuity, a corporate culture and a work environment that embraces and invests in all talent. So let's all do our part and make room for others, as Carla mentioned, and to build diversity across the pipeline. Let's get some skin in the game. Let's change the game.
Awesome. So for those listening in, I told you that this was going to be an amazing panel. I am humbled and honored to have the opportunity to moderate this panel. And we'll just say thank you from here. Thank you all for listening in. Thank you to the panelists. I think it was amazing. And I think there is knowledge there for each and every person who's open to creating a more open, honest workplace for all, a place where everyone can feel like this is the place that I belong. So thank you for the work that you're doing. And I look forward to continuing the connection with all of you. I pass it back to the WBC.
Be a step ahead. Work smarter and harder. The journey to workplace equality has long been considered women's work, but building the workforce of the future is a collaboration. It takes all of us to be open, to be leaders. Change doesn't come easy, but we believe our job is to make the world better for those who come next. So today, we remember to stay a step ahead of what's comfortable, to work smarter and harder to do the right thing, the equal thing, the bold thing. Because once you see the power of inclusion, you can't look back.